The invitation that was meant to humiliate him. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon, thick ivory cardstock trimmed in gold, the kind that doesn't just announce a wedding, it announces power. Ethan Cole stared at it for a full minute before opening it. He already knew who it was from. Vanessa Cole. His ex-wife. 6 months earlier, she had walked out of their modest suburban home with 2 suitcases and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said she deserved more. She said she was tired of living small. What she meant was simple. She had fallen in love with money. Specifically, she had fallen in love with Harrison Blackwood, real estate mogul, city donor, philanthropist with his name on hospital wings and museum galleries. A man who wore tailored suits like armor and smiled like he owned the air you breathed. Ethan was a high school history teacher. He owned chalk dust and parent-teacher conferences. He owned late-night grading sessions and packed lunches for his 8-year-old daughter Lily. And when Vanessa left, she made sure he understood exactly why. "You're a good man, Ethan," she had said that night, standing near the doorway. "But I don't want good. I want extraordinary." The word had cut deeper than any insult. Because Ethan had always tried to be extraordinary, in quiet ways. In staying late to help struggling students. In coaching Little League. In being home every night for dinner. But none of that glittered. None of that came with champagne fountains and private estates. And now here it was. The wedding invitation. "Vanessa Cole and Harrison Blackwood request the honor of your presence." Ethan let out a slow breath. It wasn't a courtesy invitation. It was a statement. She wanted him to see it. To see the mansion. To see the designer gown. To see the life she believed she had upgraded to. He almost threw it away. But then Lily walked into the kitchen. "Daddy? Who's getting married?" He swallowed and forced a smile. "Your mom." Lily froze. She nodded once as if bracing herself. "Are we invited?" Ethan hesitated. "Yes," he said softly. She thought about it for a moment. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "Are you going?" He didn't know. But that night, after Lily fell asleep, he sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the invitation again. Something inside him refused to let Vanessa control the narrative. He would not be the sad ex-husband hiding at home. He would show up. Not angry. Not bitter. Unbroken. But there was one problem. He didn't want to go alone. A woman on the sidewalk. 3 days later, Ethan found himself outside a downtown cafe after parent-teacher conferences ran late. The night air was cold. He pulled his jacket tighter and almost walked past her without noticing. She was sitting near the brick wall under a flickering streetlight. Not begging. Not sleeping. Reading. A paperback novel rested in her hands, pages marked with careful folds. A small duffel bag sat beside her. Most people hurried past her. Ethan slowed down. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way she turned each page deliberately. Maybe it was the fact that she looked peaceful in a world that ignored her. "You're blocking my light," she said suddenly without looking up. He stepped aside instinctively, surprised into a laugh. She glanced at him then. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, observant. "Sorry," he said. She studied him for a second. "You look like someone who just got bad news." He raised an eyebrow. "That obvious?" "You have the trying to look fine but not fine face." That made him laugh again. Her name was Maya Torres. He learned that in the next 15 minutes. She had once worked as a graphic designer. A startup had collapsed. Medical bills from her mother's illness had devoured her savings. One thing after another. No dramatic collapse. Just steady erosion. "I'm not helpless," she said matter-of-factly. "Just rebuilding." The word lingered. Rebuilding. Ethan understood that word. They talked longer than he expected. About books. About teaching. About resilience. At some point he heard himself saying something reckless. "I have a strange proposal." She narrowed her eyes. "That's rarely comforting." He told her about the wedding. About Vanessa. About not wanting to look defeated. "I'll pay you," he said carefully. "You just need to attend as my guest. One evening. I'll cover everything, dress, hair, transportation." She didn't answer immediately. She wasn't insulted. She wasn't flattered. She was assessing him. "Why me?" she asked finally. He thought about it. "Because you don't look like someone who needs saving," he said. "You look like someone who's choosing her next move." That made her pause. "How much?" she asked calmly. 5,000. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "For a night in uncomfortable shoes?" "Yes." She closed her book slowly. "You're either desperate or brave. Maybe both." A long silence passed. Then she held out her hand. "Deal." Preparation. The following week was surreal. Ethan borrowed a suit from his brother, one that actually fit properly. He arranged a dress fitting through a friend who owed him a favor. When Maya arrived at the boutique, she walked in like she had every right to be there. No apology. No shrinking. The emerald dress she chose wasn't flashy. It was elegant. Understated. Powerful. When she stepped out of the dressing room, Ethan actually forgot to breathe. Not because she looked glamorous. Because she looked like someone stepping back into herself. "You clean up well?" he said automatically. She glared playfully. "Careful." They laughed. But beneath the humor, something else was forming. Respect. Ethan began to realize he hadn't hired a prop. He had invited a force. The wedding day. The estate was everything Vanessa would have dreamed of. White marble steps. Crystal chandeliers. A string quartet playing beneath a glass canopy. Guests dressed in wealth. When Ethan and Maya stepped out of the car, heads turned. Not because they were loud. Because they were calm. Maya walked beside him with effortless poise. She wasn't performing. She wasn't pretending. She was simply present. People assumed she belonged. Because she acted like she did. Vanessa noticed them almost immediately. Her smile faltered for half a second. Ethan saw it. That flicker. Confusion. Curiosity. Maya leaned toward him and whispered, "Is that her?" "Yes." "She looks nervous." "She doesn't get nervous." Maya's lips curved slightly. Everyone gets nervous when the story changes. The first crack. During the cocktail hour, guests began gravitating toward Maya. She spoke about design trends. About art. About resilience in creative industries. She didn't brag. She didn't oversell. She simply existed confidently. Harrison Blackwood eventually approached. "So," he said smoothly, "how did you two meet?" Maya smiled. At a moment he didn't think anyone was watching. The answer was so layered Harrison didn't know what to do with it. Vanessa joined them moments later. Her eyes moved over Maya's dress. Her hair. Her posture. Then she looked at Ethan. "You look, well," she said carefully. "I am," he replied calmly. Vanessa's gaze shifted back to Maya. "And what do you do?" Maya didn't blink. "I build things," she said softly. "Just in different ways." The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. But it was there. For the first time since the divorce, Ethan wasn't the one shrinking. Vanessa was. As the music began and the ceremony prepared to start, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not because Vanessa was shaken, but because he wasn't. He had walked into the lion's den. And he hadn't been devoured. He had stood tall. Beside someone who reminded him that worth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in character. He didn't know yet that the real twist of the night hadn't even begun. And by the time the reception ended, it wouldn't just be Vanessa questioning her choices. The entire room would. And that was only the beginning. The speech that changed the room. The ceremony was flawless. White roses lined the aisle. Crystal light refracted through the glass ceiling and scattered across polished marble floors. Vanessa walked down the aisle like a woman who believed she had won something. Harrison stood tall, polished and composed, every inch the billionaire groom. Ethan watched without flinching. 6 months ago this moment would have destroyed him. Tonight he felt distant. Not bitter. Not aching. Just aware. Maya stood beside him, hands folded gently in front of her. She didn't whisper commentary. She didn't judge. She simply observed, like an artist studying a composition. When the vows were exchanged, polite applause filled the hall. But something subtle had shifted. People kept glancing back at Ethan. And more specifically, at Maya. Because she didn't look intimidated. She looked like she belonged. The reception begins. The reception hall was even more extravagant than the ceremony. A 7-tier cake. Live jazz. Gold-trimmed glassware. Ethan and Maya were seated near the back again, a quiet reminder of social hierarchy. But if it was meant to diminish him, it failed. Because something unexpected happened. Guests kept approaching their table. First it was a museum curator who had overheard Maya mention abstract minimalism during cocktail hour. Then it was a marketing executive who wanted her opinion on brand identity in the digital age. Then a retired judge who simply said, "You seem like someone who has seen the world clearly." Each time Maya responded without ego. Without performance. She spoke with insight. And the more she spoke, the more the table filled. Meanwhile, at the head table, Vanessa noticed. Her smile began tightening at the edges. Harrison leaned toward her once and murmured something reassuring. But reassurance doesn't work when attention shifts. And attention was shifting. The first public challenge. Halfway through dinner, Harrison stood to give a speech. It was charming, strategic, carefully constructed. He spoke about partnership, about shared vision, about building empires together. The crowd applauded. Then, in what was meant to be a show of confidence, he gestured toward Ethan. "And I'd like to thank Ethan for being here tonight," Harrison said smoothly. "It takes a strong man to attend his former spouse's wedding. That kind of maturity deserves recognition." Polite laughter rippled through the room. It was subtle, but it was there. A reminder of position. Ethan felt the heat of it, but before he could respond, Maya gently touched his arm. "Stand up," she whispered. He blinked. "What?" "Trust me." Ethan rose. The room quieted. He hadn't planned to speak. He hadn't prepared anything. But Maya stood with him. And somehow her presence steadied him. He cleared his throat. "Thank you, Harrison," he began calmly. "I appreciate that." Pause. "But I didn't come here to prove strength." The room leaned in. "I came here because I believe showing up matters. For better or worse, this was once part of my story. And I don't regret any chapter that helped me grow." Vanessa shifted slightly. Ethan continued. "I've learned something recently. Losing something doesn't mean you were lacking. Sometimes it means you were misaligned." Silence. Complete silence. "And misalignment," he added softly, "isn't failure. It's redirection." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it landed. Because he wasn't attacking anyone. He wasn't defensive. He was grounded. He nodded once and sat down. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was real. Vanessa's crack widens. Vanessa smiled, but her eyes were unsettled. Because this wasn't the broken man she expected. This wasn't the one who begged for explanations. This wasn't the one who doubted his worth. This was someone calm, centered, unmoved. And beside him stood a woman who radiated quiet power. Vanessa leaned toward Harrison again. "Who is she?" she whispered. Harrison shrugged lightly. "Someone he hired, probably." But even he didn't sound convinced. The unexpected reveal. Later in the evening, as guests gathered near the dance floor, an elderly woman approached Maya. She wore pearls and carried herself with unmistakable authority. "I couldn't help overhearing you earlier," she said. "You mentioned studying design?" "Yes," Maya replied. "Where?" "Brookfield Institute." The woman's eyes sharpened. "I chaired their scholarship board 10 years ago." Ethan felt Maya go still. "I remember a Taurus," the woman continued slowly. "Extraordinary portfolio. Had to withdraw mid-semester." Maya's jaw tightened slightly. "Yes, ma'am." "Medical hardship, if I recall." The room around them had begun to quiet. Vanessa was watching. Harrison was watching. Everyone was watching. The woman extended her hand. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore." The name rippled through the crowd. Eleanor Whitmore wasn't just wealthy. She was a major arts patron. A donor who shaped entire creative careers. "I never forgot that portfolio," Eleanor said firmly. "It was one of the most original submissions we had that year." Maya didn't speak. Because in that moment, vulnerability flickered across her composure. Not weakness, but truth. Eleanor continued. "Tell me, Miss Torres, are you still creating?" "Yes," Maya said quietly. "Whenever I can." "Good," Eleanor replied. "Because I'd like to fund your next exhibition." Silence. Absolute silence. Harrison blinked. Vanessa's glass nearly slipped from her fingers. Eleanor turned to the surrounding guests. "Talent doesn't disappear because circumstances change," she said clearly. "And sometimes resilience produces the finest art." Then she looked directly at Vanessa. "Congratulations on your marriage." The words were polite. But the implication was unmistakable. The spotlight had moved. Completely. The dance floor shifted. Music resumed. But the energy had changed. People weren't whispering about Harrison's investments anymore. They were asking Maya about her work. About her story. About her perspective. Ethan stood slightly back watching. And something unexpected happened inside him. Pride. Not ownership. Not possession. Pride in her. Because she hadn't needed saving. She had simply needed opportunity. Vanessa approached once more. This time without her practiced smile. "You didn't tell me she was connected," Vanessa said quietly to Ethan. Ethan met her gaze. "I didn't know she needed to be." Vanessa looked toward Maya, who was speaking with Eleanor near the stage. "She's not what I expected." Ethan nodded calmly. "Most extraordinary people aren't." Vanessa inhaled slowly. And for the first time since the divorce, she looked uncertain. A private conversation. Near the end of the evening, Maya stepped outside for air. Ethan followed. The estate gardens were quiet. Lanterns glowed softly along the stone path. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Just, didn't expect to run into my past tonight." "Good or bad?" "Both." She looked at him. "You know I didn't do this for the money." "I know. You also know I'm not a project." He held her gaze steadily. "I know that too." Pause. "Then why did you really ask me?" He considered the question carefully. "Because when everyone else walked past you, you looked like someone who refused to disappear." Her eyes softened slightly. "And you?" she asked. "Why did you show up tonight?" He exhaled slowly. "To stop disappearing myself." The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was honest. For the first time, this wasn't about Vanessa, or revenge, or proving anything. It was about two people who refused to let circumstances define them. Inside the hall. Back inside, guests were still buzzing. Vanessa stood near the head table, watching from a distance. She had wanted to showcase her upgrade. Instead, she had witnessed something she couldn't manufacture. Authenticity. And it unsettled her more than any insult could have. Harrison placed a reassuring hand on her back. But reassurance feels hollow when comparison enters the room. And comparison had arrived. Not dressed in diamonds, but in emerald green. The night was almost over. But the final moment, the one that would echo far beyond this estate, was still waiting. Because sometimes karma doesn't shout. Sometimes it simply reveals. And once revealed, everything changes. And the biggest change was about to begin. The moment she refused to be small. The night should have ended there. With polite applause. With champagne refills. With whispered gossip fading into the cool evening air. But real turning points rarely arrive quietly. They arrive when someone decides they will no longer shrink. And Maya Torres had been shrinking for years. Not in spirit, but in visibility. Tonight that changed. The offer no one expected. As the final course was cleared and guests migrated toward the outdoor terrace, Eleanor Whitmore remained near Maya, asking thoughtful questions. Not shallow ones. Not social ones. Real ones. "What do you want your work to say?" Eleanor asked. Maya hesitated, not because she didn't know, but because no one had asked her that in a long time. "I wanted to remind people," she said slowly, "that dignity isn't tied to circumstance. That struggle doesn't erase brilliance." Eleanor studied her carefully. "And are you prepared to be visible again?" The question lingered heavier than the others. Visibility meant risk. It meant scrutiny. It meant people seeing not just talent, but the gap years. The homelessness. The fall. Maya inhaled deeply. "I don't want to hide anymore." Eleanor nodded once. "Good. Then tomorrow morning my assistant will contact you. We'll arrange studio space, materials, and a formal exhibition proposal. You'll need a portfolio prepared within 30 days. 30 days. The words hit like a wave. Maya hadn't had stable housing in nearly a year. She hadn't had consistent access to materials. And now, 30 days. Ethan stepped slightly closer, sensing the weight of it. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said quietly. Maya looked at him. And something fierce flickered in her eyes. "Yes," she said calmly. "I do." Then she turned back to Eleanor. "I accept." Vanessa's private breakdown. Across the terrace, Vanessa watched. She wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't composed. She was unraveling quietly behind controlled posture. This was not the script. The script was simple. She upgraded. Ethan declined. End of story. But now Ethan looked steadier than ever. And the woman he brought, someone Vanessa assumed was decorative, was becoming the most discussed person at her own wedding. Harrison noticed her tension. "You're overthinking it," he said under his breath. "She's being handed a career," Vanessa replied tightly. Harrison shrugged lightly. "Patronage happens." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. But not like that. Because this wasn't charity. It was recognition. And recognition is harder to compete with than wealth. The confrontation. Near the end of the evening, as guests began departing, Vanessa approached Maya directly. No witnesses this time. No polite audience. Just the two of them under a string of warm lights. "I underestimated you," Vanessa said plainly. Maya didn't respond immediately. "I think," Maya replied carefully, "you underestimated him." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "You don't know our history." "No," Maya agreed calmly. "But I know how you look at him." "And how is that?" "Like he was practice." The words landed clean. Not cruel. Just honest. Vanessa inhaled sharply. You think you've won something tonight? Maya shook her head gently. This isn't a competition. Vanessa laughed once, brittle. Everything is a competition. Maya held her gaze. That's exhausting. And with that she stepped away, leaving Vanessa standing there. Without the last word. A different kind of drive home. The car ride back was quiet, but not tense. Different from before. Not anxious. Not strategic. Peaceful. Ethan glanced over at Maya in the soft glow of passing streetlights. You were incredible tonight. She gave him a small look. I was honest. That's rarer. Pause. You don't have to go back to the street, he added gently. She knew what he meant. Not as charity. Not as obligation. But as transition. I won't, she said. Not because of pride. But because something had shifted permanently. Opportunity had entered the room. And once opportunity sees you, it's harder to disappear. The real shift. The next morning, photos from the wedding began circulating on social media. Vanessa and Harrison under chandeliers. The first dance. The kiss. But in almost every wide-angle shot, there was Maya. Emerald against marble. Confident. Radiant. Engaged in conversation. Within hours, speculation began. Who is she? Is she an investor? Is she connected to Whitmore? Eleanor Whitmore posted a single photograph on her official account. It was of Maya laughing mid-conversation. The caption read, Resilience is the rarest form of talent. That was it. No explanation. No context. But the art world paid attention. By afternoon, 2 gallery owners had reached out. By evening, a design blog requested an interview. Ethan watched it unfold in quiet amazement. Not because karma had embarrassed Vanessa, but because truth had elevated Maya. An elevation rooted in truth cannot be manufactured. An unexpected visit. 2 days later, Ethan received a call from the school principal. There's someone here asking for you. Who? Vanessa. He closed his eyes briefly. She stood in the empty classroom when he entered. No makeup. No audience. No performance. You looked happy, she said softly. I am. That wasn't supposed to happen. He studied her. I wasn't supposed to survive either, he replied gently. A long silence filled the space between old versions of themselves. Did I make a mistake? She asked finally. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Not out of cruelty, but out of honesty. You made a choice, he said. And so did I. Her voice trembled slightly. You don't miss me? He considered the question carefully. I miss who I thought we were. That hurt. He saw it land. But it was the clean kind of hurt. The kind that ends illusions. Vanessa nodded slowly. I thought extraordinary meant bigger, she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. Sometimes it just means deeper. And in that moment there was no villain. No triumph. Just clarity. The studio. Within a week, Maya stood inside a sunlit studio provided by Eleanor's foundation. Clean walls. Fresh canvases. New materials. She ran her fingers lightly across the stretched linen. Not as someone rescued, but as someone restored. Ethan stood quietly near the doorway. You ready? He asked. She looked at him. And smiled. More than ready. Then she dipped the brush. The first stroke wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. And with it, the past began transforming into something visible. Something powerful. Something undeniable. What began as a plan to prove a point had become something far greater. Not revenge. Not humiliation. But revelation. Vanessa wanted extraordinary. She just misunderstood what it looked like. And the night she meant to showcase her victory became the night the world discovered someone unstoppable. But the story wasn't finished. Because true karma doesn't just elevate the overlooked. It reveals the fragile foundations beneath those who built their identity on appearances. And Harrison Blackwood's foundation was about to crack. And when it did, the entire city would be watching. When the spotlight turned. Success is loud when it's built on applause. But it's silent when it's built on truth. And while Maya's world was beginning to rise, quietly, steadily, another world was beginning to tremble. Harrison Blackwood had spent 20 years crafting an image. Philanthropist. Visionary. Empire builder. He understood optics. He understood perception. He understood control. What he did not understand was unpredictability. And Maya Torres had just introduced it into his orbit. The first article. 3 weeks after the wedding, an article appeared in a respected design journal. From sidewalk to studio, the unfiltered rise of Maya Torres. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't exploitative. It was honest. It told the story of a gifted artist forced into survival mode by systemic failures. Medical debt, collapsing contracts, a safety net that wasn't strong enough. It mentioned the wedding briefly. It mentioned Eleanor Whitmore's endorsement. But the focus was on her work. And her work was powerful. Raw. Layered. Her first completed piece was titled Misalignment. A fractured skyline. Two figures walking in opposite directions. Light breaking through a crack. The symbolism was subtle but unmistakable. The art world responded quickly. Invitations followed. Panels. Interviews. Preview requests for the exhibition. And with every new headline, Maya made one thing clear. I wasn't saved. I was seen. That line spread. Because it resonated far beyond art circles. Harrison's problem. At first, Harrison ignored it. He was too busy negotiating acquisitions and attending board meetings. But influence is currency. And when attention shifts, it affects markets. Within a month, journalists began revisiting Harrison's philanthropic history. A small financial blog published a piece questioning one of his real estate redevelopment projects. It wasn't illegal, but it was aggressive. Tenants displaced. Affordable housing promises diluted. Nothing criminal. Just morally gray. The article didn't go viral immediately, but it planted a seed. Then someone reposted a clip from the wedding, Harrison's speech thanking Ethan for being strong enough to attend. The comment section turned. Why did that feel condescending? He sounds threatened. Funny how the artist stole the show. Perception is fragile. And Harrison's began to shift. Vanessa's realization. Vanessa felt it first. The difference. The tone of conversations. The way people referenced Maya's upcoming exhibition more enthusiastically than the wedding. She began receiving subtle comments. You must be proud you connected everyone. You always had an eye for talent. It wasn't praise. It was misattribution. Because the narrative had moved beyond her. And that unsettled her more than any public embarrassment. One evening she scrolled through Maya's growing online presence. Studio photos. Behind-the-scenes shots. Interviews where she spoke thoughtfully about dignity and rebuilding. Then Vanessa saw a clip from a panel discussion. Maya was asked, "What did that wedding represent to you?" She smiled softly before answering. It represented closure. Not of love, but of self-doubt. Vanessa paused the video. Self-doubt. That word lingered. Because for months she had believed Ethan lacked ambition. But watching Maya speak, Vanessa realized something uncomfortable. Ambition doesn't always shout. Sometimes it persists quietly. And she had confused quiet strength for smallness. The investigation. 2 weeks before Maya's exhibition launch, a major newspaper released an expose. It wasn't about the wedding. It wasn't about Ethan. It was about Harrison. Specifically, about a redevelopment deal that had displaced over 100 low-income families while his company accepted tax incentives labeled as community revitalization. The article wasn't accusatory. It was investigative. Balanced. But it raised questions. The timing couldn't have been worse. Sponsors began calling. Board members requested clarification. Harrison assured everyone it was misinterpretation. But perception doesn't wait for legal review. It reacts. And reaction is powerful. Ethan's unexpected role. Meanwhile, Ethan remained in his classroom. Teaching. Grading papers. Helping Lily prepare for a science fair. He wasn't chasing headlines. He wasn't seeking attention. But one afternoon, a parent approached him after school. "I saw the interview," she said. "Your friend is incredible." He smiled gently. "She is. You must be proud." He nodded. Not possessively. Not romantically. Proud in the way you're proud when someone refuses to let life define them. Later that week, a local nonprofit invited Ethan to speak at a youth mentorship event. Not because of the wedding, but because someone had shared his "Misalignment is Redirection" speech. It had circulated quietly online. People connected to it. He almost declined. Public speaking wasn't his thing. But Lily looked up at him and said, "You should go. You help people all the time. Let more people hear it." So he did. And something surprising happened. He wasn't just a history teacher anymore. He became a voice of resilience. Not dramatic. Not viral. But steady. The opening night. The gallery opening arrived on a crisp autumn evening. Minimalist white walls. Soft lighting. A curated soundtrack. Maya stood near the entrance, not hiding. not overwhelmed, grounded. Eleanor Whitmore stood beside her. Guests flowed in. Collectors, critics, artists, and unexpectedly, Vanessa, alone. She approached Maya slowly. No tension this time. No sharp edges. I wanted to see it properly, Vanessa said quietly. Maya nodded. They walked together toward misalignment. Vanessa studied the fractured skyline. The two figures. The crack of light. Is that us? She asked softly. Maya didn't answer directly. It's about two people walking in directions they need to walk. Vanessa exhaled slowly. I thought success meant security. Maya looked at her gently. Sometimes it just means clarity. Vanessa's eyes shimmered briefly, but she didn't cry. Because this wasn't about regret. It was about understanding. The final shift. As the evening progressed, Maya's work sold. Not because of hype. Because of merit. Critics praised the emotional depth. Collectors competed. By the end of the night, every major piece had been reserved. Eleanor leaned toward Maya. You're no longer rebuilding, she said softly. You're leading. Across the room, Ethan stood beside Lily, who stared up at the paintings in awe. Daddy, she whispered, she turned hard things into beautiful things. Ethan smiled. Yes, he said. She did. And that was the true reversal. Vanessa had chased extraordinary. Harrison had manufactured prestige. But extraordinary isn't bought. It's forged. In struggle. In humility. In resilience. Outside the gallery, reporters gathered, not to ask about the wedding anymore, but about ethics, about redevelopment, about Harrison Blackwood. The spotlight had turned fully, and once the spotlight turns, it reveals everything. And Harrison's empire was no longer untouchable. The final chapter was coming, and this time, no one would be able to rewrite the narrative, because the truth had already stepped into the light. The kind of extraordinary that lasts. Power built on image can survive applause. It cannot survive exposure. 2 weeks after Maya's exhibition sold out, Harrison Blackwood stood in front of a bank of cameras outside his corporate headquarters. He looked composed. Tailored suit. Neutral tie. Carefully measured expression. But the questions weren't flattering. Did your redevelopment firm knowingly displace tenants without proper relocation support? Why were tax incentives categorized as community housing used for luxury conversions? Were investors informed of pending complaints? Harrison gave answers. Technically correct ones. Legally sound ones. But the tone had shifted. The press wasn't admiring. They were scrutinizing. Behind him, board members watched carefully. Investors watched even more carefully. And somewhere across the city, people who had once been quietly displaced were finally being heard. The exposé had triggered a formal review. Nothing criminal, yet. But reputations don't need convictions to crack. They just need doubt. And doubt had entered the room. Vanessa's quiet reckoning. Vanessa watched the press conference alone in the penthouse she once believed was proof of winning. The marble floors felt colder than usual. The skyline view felt less impressive. She muted the television halfway through Harrison's statement. Because something inside her had begun whispering a truth she had tried to ignore. Security built on status isn't security. It's dependency. She thought about Ethan. About the kitchen table. About the way he used to sit with Lily during homework. About the speech he gave at the wedding. Misalignment isn't failure. It's redirection. She had interpreted that as coping. Now she understood it as strength. And strength, she realized, doesn't need to announce itself. It just remains steady. The call. That evening, Vanessa called Ethan. Not to argue. Not to defend. To speak honestly. Can we talk? She asked. They met at a quiet park near Lily's school. Neutral ground. No marble. No chandeliers. Just benches and autumn leaves. Vanessa looked different. Less polished. More present. I thought I wanted a bigger life, she said quietly. Ethan didn't interrupt. I thought extraordinary meant powerful. Untouchable. She looked down at her hands. I didn't realize untouchable can also mean disconnected. Ethan considered her words carefully. We wanted different things, he said gently. Vanessa nodded. Yes. But I also misjudged you. He waited. I mistook stability for stagnation, she admitted. And humility for lack of ambition. The words hung between them. I'm not asking for anything, she added quickly. I just needed to say that. Ethan studied her for a moment. There was no bitterness left in him. Just clarity. I hope you find what you're actually looking for, he said sincerely. Vanessa's eyes shimmered slightly. For the first time, she replied softly, I think I know what that is. Not wealth. Not spectacle. Alignment. She stood. Take care of Lily, she said. I always will. And that was it. No dramatic reconciliation. No theatrical collapse. Just truth acknowledged. Harrison's fall. The investigation concluded quietly but firmly. Harrison's firm was fined for regulatory oversights and required to fund relocation assistance for affected families. The board announced a temporary leadership transition. In corporate language, that meant one thing. He stepped down. Not in disgrace. But not in triumph either. The empire remained. But the myth cracked. Because extraordinary built on dominance cannot withstand sustained transparency. And transparency had arrived. A different kind of success. Months later, Maya's second exhibition opened. Not in a massive gallery. In a community arts center. Free admission. Open to students. Open to families. Ethan arrived with Lily, who now carried a small sketchbook everywhere she went. Maya greeted them warmly. No celebrity distance. No ego. You brought your art? Maya asked Lily. Lily nodded shyly. Maya knelt beside her. Good. Keep creating. Even when nobody's watching. Ethan watched the interaction quietly. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had invited Maya to a wedding to prove he wasn't broken. Instead, she had reminded him he never was. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Maya joined him outside. You changed my life, he said softly. She shook her head. No. You opened a door. I walked through it. Pause. And you? She asked. What changed for you? He thought carefully. I stopped measuring myself by someone else's standards. She smiled. That's freedom. He nodded. Yes, it is. The true reveal. The final twist wasn't wealth. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't public humiliation. It was something far more powerful. Ethan remained a teacher. But now he spoke at mentorship events about resilience. Maya became a respected artist, but she never hid where she started. Vanessa rebuilt her life more quietly, volunteering with housing initiatives, learning from what she once overlooked. And Harrison? He faded from headlines. Because when attention is no longer fueled by spectacle, it moves on. The real extraordinary story wasn't about a billionaire's fall. It was about a homeless woman who refused to disappear. A single father who refused to shrink. And a wedding meant to humiliate. That became the moment dignity took center stage. Final scene. 1 year after the wedding, Ethan and Lily walked past the same cafe where he had first met Maya. The sidewalk was busy. The streetlight flickered the same way. But Maya wasn't there. Because she had a studio now. A home. A future she built with her own hands. Lily tugged at Ethan's sleeve. Daddy? Yes. Was that the best night ever? He smiled. No. She frowned slightly. It was the night we stopped being afraid. And that was better. Some people chase extraordinary. Some people try to buy it. But the kind that lasts is built quietly. With character. With resilience. With truth. And when truth walks into the room, it doesn't need to steal the show. It becomes it.